The weather seems as appealing here as it is in Florida.
It's not
Tom,
bad. It's not bad. We had torrential rain all day yesterday, so I'm enjoying
my
obviously.
heart bleeds.
Yeah, I'm enjoying sitting indoors watching this nice sunshine out here. Great. Welcome to IDCom's Media Snack episode 23. So this is a slightly different one. I'm here in Florida. David, you're in London.
I am in London.
The reason that we're doing the live broadcast today, obviously we're in different countries, but there's a lot to talk about. I'm here in Florida attending a conference by the ANA, the Association of National Advertisers in the US. And every year they do a number of different conferences, as we know. But every year they pull together it's the biggest global conference for marketing procurement. It's called Advertising Financial Management. It's been running many, many years. And it just keeps getting bigger. We had over 700 delegates here this week. It finished. It's just finished the conference now. Started on Sunday, and it's a great forum. Brings together all the marketing procurement leads of some of the biggest brands in the world to share learnings, discuss some kind of key topics, and importantly, just to kind of network and kind of reconnect.
And so, Tom, the kind of the big focus on this year's conference, we thought would be some form of announcement on the back of the ANA's transparency investigation, which they've been conducting for the last 4 or 5 months. Did they share anything?
No, well, I mean, I think that was the intention of everybody coming to the conference when we booked. I mean, we booked up back in September or something like that, I think.
Yeah.
And this was as this rebate investigation. As viewers will remember, there were 2 firms hired to do that. K2 Intelligence, which is a kind of corporate investigations firm, partnered with Ubiquity in the US to provide marketplace knowledge and domain expertise in media. The process kicked off, as we know, in kind of September time, and the anticipation was that this perhaps would be the conference, given that where this was essentially launched as a principle last year, that it would make sense for the ANA to be reporting back. I think that was I know that was their original intention. Early versions of the agenda did have that in it, but over the last month or two, I think they've understood that there's been more. Well, the K2 investigation has been more substantial, and they've had more interviews and evidence, I think, maybe than they anticipated. It's taken longer to write the reports around that, and so therefore the ANA had announced that the report wouldn't be ready in time for this conference. And so this very large agenda, I mean, it's just staggering, the brochure that they give you. I mean, the very large agenda didn't really cover much in terms of the actual specifics of the report. But there were two things really where this was covered. On Sunday afternoon, Bill Duggan from the ANA hosted. On the Sundays, they do this thing called the Town Hall. So last year it was all about media transparency. This year, I guess the intention was to talk more about media transparency, but they didn't have enough, perhaps on the back of the K2 reporting, to be able to do that. So they did that on programmatic media buying. And if you look in the brochure, let me read this to you. If you look in the brochure, they describe the programmatic town hall, and it says, the town hall will highlight recent ANA learnings on programmatic buying. So they've done a bit of research on this from us members, and then transition into an open discussion to get the input of conference attendees. Okay, hence the town hall. That was it. So that Bill had presented the findings. The challenge is, though, that programmatic is still such a complicated and slightly intimidating topic for many of the attending marketing procurement delegates, and actually when it was passed over to them to kind of contribute to the discussion, there was a marked silence.
Sounds quite awkward.
It was a little bit awkward.
So that was the only reference to to issues around transparency and the way that the ANA are kind of pioneering this whole investigation themselves. It was just within that town hall piece.
Well, there was one other point which that came up. So Bill had done the town hall. It's a shame that the attending group didn't really engage with the discussion, perhaps as he hoped. But the following morning, on Monday morning, Bob Liodice, who's the CEO of the ANA, who leads the ANA over here, made his opening remarks. And again, this is I'll read you what it says in the brochure. You probably can't see this, but it says opening remarks: media's big four concerns. So I thought, okay, this is great, really good.
Sounds interesting.
So maybe he's going to kind of tackle the thing. I think his intention, as I understand it from hearing from others, was to talk more about media. As it was, his opening remarks were quite broad, still very interesting, very and very insightful. And he's a great leader for the conference. So he kind of set it all up, but it was quite a kind of broad perspective. It wasn't as sharp on media as perhaps we thought it might be. He did reference media right at the end of that, his opening remarks, and he talked about these four concerns, which he listed as being fraud, ad blocking, measurement and viewability, and then transparency. Okay, so I thought, right, we'll get to transparency maybe right at the end. He provided a one slide on an update on the K2 study, and which was quite interesting, because what they've decided to do, and I think this is the right thing to do, is they've asked K2 and Ubiquity to report separately. So even though they've worked very closely together through this process, actually I think it makes sense for K2 to report the facts. I mean, he called it marketplace behaviors and facts. That's K2's responsibility. So they will present the evidence that they've gathered over the last 6-7 months as a standalone report, and then as a companion to that, Ubiquity will give kind of marketers guidelines and guidance on some of the implications, and they called that companion report, which will give transparency on trading practice. So how to get greater transparency on trading practice. So we hope that would be a very practical set of guidelines, I think, for marketers to deal with some of the evidence maybe that K2 have uncovered.
Because I mean that's actually interesting, because the commitment by the ANA at the beginning of the investigation was that they would simply provide guidelines on the back of their findings. Yeah. The fact that they have now issued a statement to say that they were actually going to provide some facts behind that or accompanying the guidelines, I think suggests that maybe they have found something quite interesting. And so finally, just on this and wrapping this up, when is the report? When are the guidelines and the accompanying K2 report going to be published?
Yeah, so they keep saying late spring, but as I've kind of been around asking people what that might mean, it looks like either the last week of May, or the first week of June. So my impression is that there is something substantive that I think is going to be reported here.
Good.
Hopefully that will engender some positive change and shift the debate back up to where we've been trying to get it to talk about transparency as a kind of key principle of trust in a relationship.
Speaking about clients and their involvement in the conference, I was looking at the agenda, and two notable brands were presenting. Coca-cola, the chief procurement officer from North America at Coca-cola, was presenting, as was the CMO from Target.
Yeah.
Did you attend those sessions?
Yeah, I did. I sat on both of those. They were separate sessions, but this is a funny conference because I think everybody anticipated that it was all going to be dominated again by media transparency conversations, but that was notably absent. And so you're kind of struggling to find a theme in things. I think the ANA perhaps had to dilute the agenda a little bit or change the agenda around a little bit. So it was hard to kind of hear what a common theme was. But what you just talked about, the CMO, CPO
Yeah.
That's Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Procurement Officer, in case people want to know. That I think was a good theme. If there was a theme, it seemed to be a recurring conversation in lots of presentations.
Yeah.
Was how to get marketing and procurement working better together. And the two you just mentioned, which was Jeffrey Jones, who's the CMO of Target, which is a big retailer in the US, has been very successful, and kind of well regarded for the quality of their marketing versus other retailers. And then Christiana Ruggiero, who's the Chief Procurement Officer for Coca-cola in the whole of North America. They presented separately, but with a common theme. And Jeffrey Jones from Target is that they've managed to get, I guess he's championed this, marketing, all the marketing and all finance people in the entire organization are incentivized with the same targets, and they have the same goals. Okay, so they're bonused in exactly the same way. So that was just fantastic to hear, because that's something that you and I have talked about a lot in the past. Where marketing and procurement are at some kind of tension within a business, that has a trickle down effect, which means that from an agency perspective, when it comes to media, from an agency perspective, you sometimes feel like you have two separate clients, right? You have your marketing client really wanting one thing, which is to drive growth of brands, and the risk is that you've got a procurement client, perhaps, who's looking for something else because they're incentivized on a 5% cost saving or something. So he said aligning those two was a really big deal, and I think we totally agree with that. The CMO and the CPO have to be aligned, within the corporate structure, and that makes things a lot easier.
Makes a lot of sense.
And then on the kind of flip side of that, then Christina from Coke, who's a CPO, then talked about how they were trying to empower their procurement, specifically marketing procurement. And bear in mind, she's CPO, right? So she looks over lots of different spend. Marketing obviously is only one small part of that. But within marketing, she said we have to train procurement to be good at marketing. So they've invested heavily to create specialists in marketing procurement. And marketing is not seen as a kind of transient procurement job, in the sense that you change categories. You try and build and retain knowledge within marketing procurement. And then they've taken marketing procurement and made it sit within marketing and report up through marketing lines, which I think was quite a new thing for them. I don't know how.
Well, I used to work. Yeah, I used to work at Coke, and in fairness, it was a long time ago, and procurement were heavily involved in the supply chain. But they had absolutely no involvement, certainly within my division, in marketing. And whilst Coca-cola went through an enormously successful period through the 90s, they were perhaps less accountable when it came to where that marketing and media investment was going, because the share price was constantly increasing and business was very, very good. But now, with procurement becoming more and more important within large corporate organizations for the right reasons, embedding them within marketing, I think, makes such a lot of sense. And it's obviously working, right? So I think she illustrated a number of case studies that illustrates how successful that integration has been for the Coca-Cola company.
It was just really good to hear. You don't hear much about Coca-Cola's procurement, because they're most often kind of celebrated for their marketing. And she gave you a real sense that there's a great strategy and a sophisticated procurement organization that sits behind a sophisticated marketing team. So both Christina and Jeffrey.
Sorry, Tom. In stark contrast to Pepsi, if you remember, we covered the issue, in a very early media snap, where PepsiCo had, dismantled, if you like, their entire marketing procurement division, and made that the responsibility of marketing. So, whilst perhaps the responsibilities and roles remain the same within there, the distinction between who is responsible, whether it be marketing or procurement, is very different for both of these companies. closing on the conference, but keeping within I think the kind of the US link, we've picked up both on an interesting article that relates to a communications company called MDC Partners, right? That own a number of very high-profile marketing communication companies, not least Crispin Porter, Anomaly, 72, and Sunny. And there's been a report from a Wall Street company that has questioned some of their financial reports, and actually that got traction this side of the Atlantic as well, because it was profiled, or the story was featured in this week's trade press as well. Have you heard much about that? Has there been much talk about MDC and their financial situation over in Florida?
No, well, I mean, judging by the parties that MDC was throwing here in Florida, I don't think the financial situation is too grave. Not that I attended them, actually. I wasn't invited, obviously.
Of course.
I was too busy working. But the story that you remember, that you refer to, is kind of interesting. MDC is one of the kind of smaller kind of holding companies outside the 10 of top 6, and own a mixture of different agency assets, creative and media and others. They hit the headlines for the wrong reasons last year when the CEO, Mars Nadal, had to step down after the SEC here found irregularities in his expenses, corporate expenses.
Was he forced to pay back $20 million?
$21 million he had to pay back. And the SEC investigation is ongoing. There is still, it's not done yet. There may be more. But I mean, that had kind of died down. Nadal out of the way. They got a new CEO in. It seems to be kind of settling down. And then this guy, Daniel Yu is his name, who's a well-known investor, but he's mostly known for being what's called a short seller. So he'll kind of bet against stock. And he wrote a very long blog post explaining why he was going to short the stock of MDC. On the back of that report, which I think came out on Friday last week, the share price dropped a fair bit.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's the first time. I mean, we've been talking about, look, you know, over the last few years, that the share prices of agency groups has performed incredibly well. And you know, in conversations that we've had with investors or analysts, the question always is, you know, is this sustainable? How are agencies going to maintain this level of growth in profit? And it's a good question. We don't have the answer to that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this. We'd be doing something else, right? We'd be sat on our boats in Bermuda.
In Florida.
Florida, yeah, a bit cheaper. But you know, we have no crystal ball. We don't know. But it's a really good question. How are these groups going to kind of sustain that? And we were wondering, and I've been kind of curious as to whether anyone's ever going to bet against it. You know, has it reached a peak? You know, and you think in the context, I don't think Daniel Yu is making this position because, particularly around media transparency issues, but you think about the issues that are kind of on the clouds that might be gathering over some of these large agency groups, and wonder whether that could have an impact on their future profitability and growth, if that report is particularly damaging. So I'm curious as to whether anyone would short stock. Turns out that somebody has. This guy has put a big position against MDC.
Although, I mean, in fairness to I suppose to Gotham, I think his company's called Gotham City. You know, MDC are somewhat of an easier target. Interesting to see whether he would go short on GroupM or WPP stock. I mean, with MDC, he believes that, you know, their stock price is overvalued by the tune of 92%, and he thinks they're sitting on an enormous amount of debt. You know, he challenged their organic revenue growth targets. You know, they predicted a 7% organic growth increase, and he suggested it was actually going to be nearer 1.5%. And when they came to the market with their first quarter results, he was actually right. You know, their organic growth figures were up 2.5% or 2.3%. So far nearer to his approximate assumption rather than perhaps their predicted one. So I think he's having a go at MDC for accounting reasons and for concerns that he has. It would be interesting to see whether he would do that with one of the kind of big 5 or 6 players.
Yeah, and you might think, right now that you'd be foolish to bet against the big groups, continuing their rise. The new CEO of MDC they did their earnings call yesterday, and he was very bullish, as you might expect, and pushed back and said that the Daniel Yu's report was entirely inaccurate. But so we'll see.
And that has been supported by a number of other Wall Street financial institutions that have backed and supported MDC partners. So perhaps he's a lone voice in this. But nevertheless, it makes for an interesting story.
It does indeed. We'll keep an eye on that one.
Okay, so and then I suppose finally we are going to do a little bit of self-promotion. We have a webinar planned for next week where we are going to share the results and perhaps slightly more narrative around the transparency study that we conducted. And I think you and I are going to host a webinar. It's going to take place on Wednesday the 11th of May. The time is 12:30 British Standard Time, so just after 12 o'clock in the afternoon. The duration of the session is going to be an hour. And for anybody that is interested, then I think there's going to be a link that Nigel will place on this media snack that you can go through and register your interest. And also, if you go onto our website, there is going to be a way that you can register that way as well.
Following the transparency insights and research that we'll talk about next week, we'll have a slightly more workshop-focused kind of practical session about how to take some of those insights and how to work with your agencies if you want to, if you're interested, as you should be, to increase your levels of transparency, how to go about doing that. So, some good sessions coming up. If you're in marketing, procurement, an agency, and you think transparency is an issue, it's definitely going to be worth an hour of your time. So follow the link and sign up, and we look forward to you being on the call next week.
Okay. All right. Well, I think with that we'll close. We will allow you to get back to your cocktails, and don't forget the factor 50, Tom. And next week we'll be back to normal. You and I will be sitting here and delivering Media Snack number 24.
Yep.
In the meantime, it's goodbye from London.
And a very goodbye from Florida.